Hello. This is going to be my last clip that I do for tonight, but I am going to cover, I am Dr. Twyla Williams Damond, first of all. I am going to cover the problem statement, the purpose statement, and the research questions. I am both going to cover them and also talk about your writing a prospectus, what those sections should look like. But I am also going to cover how to formulate those particular statements for those of you who are not necessarily doing sections of that in a prospectus, but just need to know how to formulate those particular components. So, first of all, let's talk about the problem statement. So, the problem statement is a declarative statement of the problem under study, and it always starts with "it is not known." Okay, it is not known. Every time I see a problem statement, it should start like that. That is the way that I identify what the problem statement is for the study. It is not known. Okay? It begins that way. Now, if you are doing a quantitative study, it would be it is not known if and to what degree there is a difference, or if and to what degree there is a relationship, but it still starts with it is not known. If you are doing qualitative research, the statement would be it is not known how, or it is not known why. Okay? So each of those statements starts with it is not known. That is one way that we can decipher between our problem and our purpose statement. But that is the way that you introduce the statement. That is the correct way to do so. Okay? There's some things that we should do when we are testing our problem statement, because we've gotten all these gap articles, okay, and we've identified what we believe is a researchable topic. And then we come up with this problem statement that says it is not known. So there's a test that you can run to determine whether your research problem statement is feasible or not. And it's called the ROC test, ROC test. First of all, is it researchable? Is it original? And is it contributory? ROC. So when we talk about being researchable, is your problem statement one that can be answered by collecting and analyzing data? Okay, some questions can't be, but if you're going to do a dissertation, that needs to be the case. Do you have the time, the resources, and the skills to carry out the research that's going to be necessary in order to answer that particular research question that you're coming up with? Oftentimes, there are limitations. If you have to be in several different states and there's a financial limitation and you can't get to data any other way but in person, then that would mean that it's not researchable for you or reasonable, even because you don't have the resources to be able to conduct that study. Is the research accessible? Are you trying to do a study where you would not get the information? For instance, you want to do a study on FBI personalities, and you will never get to that information. You have to be very careful when dealing with government entities. It takes a really, really long time to get approval, and usually you don't. You not only have to go through the IRB that is at our institution, you also have to go through the federal and state IRBs, and it is a process that can take an extremely long time without good results. I've had a couple of students do that. One of them was successful, but it literally took over a year for them to even get approval through the government, and the other one had to basically change your study. Another thing to think about, the accessibility. You need to think about ethics, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But ethically, can you get to certain groups? There are certain subgroups that you cannot study because it is not ethical. You cannot study those that are mentally handicapped, physically handicapped. That is very, very difficult population to get to. Children under 18 years old, that is not something that a road that you probably do not want to go down. So when we are talking about studying those groups, that's why you see so many studies that are done through the teacher's perspective or the parent's perspective. or the administrator, because it is extremely difficult to get permission to deal with students under 18. Prisoners, I've had some studies that have come up and want it to be done under my guidance for prisoners. And I simply tell them add EX at the beginning and put a dash, because that is the only way you will get to be able to study prisoners. You deal with ex prisoners, okay, ex offenders. So there's ways to get around some of these items, but you want to make sure that you steer clear of those groups that are protected classes. And it is your job as a scholar to find out what those classes are. And you do this through your IRB research, your CITI training that you've taken, and they will tell you what groups are protected and what will take an extreme amount of time to get permission to study, if you can even get those permissions in the end. Another thing, as far as your problem statement being researchable, can you find an organization that will give you written formal permission to conduct the study on their site? Because you need a site authorization. You have to have that in hand. So if you're working for someone or an entity that won't do that, then you're going to be in a pickle. So you need to think about that beforehand. And can you actually access the data through public sources? This is what we call archival data or publicly available data. That data is usually extremely easy to get a hold of because it is publicly available. But sometimes to get at data sets, you do need certain permissions to do so. So just think about it. So is your problem statement researchable? Okay. Is your problem statement original? Is it original? Has anyone else done it? What makes your study unique? It has to definitely be different. You can't do a study that someone else did unless you're doing a replication study. And then still, even with that, a replication study is done, it's still some different nuances about it. So is it original? If you're doing a replication study, are you doing it with a different population? Are you doing it with a different time frame? Are you doing it in a different geographic area? So, you have to know what are the original aspects of your proposed problem statement. And does it examine or explore a new issue? Okay. Does it do it from a different perspective? Okay. Of a problem that already exists, and maybe somebody studied it in a different way. So that's the original question that you need to ask about your problem statement. And then, is it contributory? Does it contribute to the body of existing knowledge? Okay. Should it be studied at all? Does it address an identified need? Your gap is going to prove or disprove that. Your gap statement, your background statement will prove or disprove that. Does it contribute to practice? Does it contribute to society? And does it contribute to personal purpose for the future? Does it help in some way? Okay. When writing your problem statement, you need to make sure that you are concise. It is one declarative statement. It is not 2 or 3, and it is not a paragraph long. It is a concise, clear statement to the point. You indicate your variables if you're doing quantitative, and you indicate your phenomena if you are doing qualitative. And also in a quantitative problem statement, you need to make sure that it can be measured, okay? And the population that's involved. So those are all components of your problem statement. So that's what the problem statement should look like. But there's also a problem statement section. And in the problem statement section, if you're writing this, after you narrate that question, that statement that I talked about, the problem statement, the section is going on to describe a few more things. And you'll see that in the rubric. First of all, you're going to summarize after you say the problem statement very clearly. And one other thing I need to say, the problem statement never changes. Every time you address that problem statement in your draft, it will be narrated the exact same way. It is one of the few items in the prospectus, proposal, dissertation that you can use copy and paste. And it should never, ever change. It should stay the same once you solidify it. So once you give this problem statement at the beginning of this section called the problem statement, you summarize the problem to be investigated, describe the defined need from empirical literature. You identify the broad population affected by the problem, And then you will suggest how proposed research may contribute to solving the problem. And that's clearly outlined in your rubric. You will also have to go on to identify certain things in this problem statement section that you may not have thought of. You are going to be asked about what is the general population. So you need to know what the general population is. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. What's the population of interest? You will also have to address the importance, the scope, or the opportunity for the problem. You will have to do that. I think the rubric asks for either, but I usually have my students do, 2 out of 3. Importance, scope, opportunity. Literally, the importance of the study is, the scope of the study is, the opportunity for the study is. I mean, literal statements. The population of interest is, the general population for the study is. These are literal statements that need to be put in that section. As simply as that. Don't make it harder than it has to be. Okay, and you will also have to talk about the unit of analysis. And you say, what is the unit of analysis? Well, I'm going to have you look that up because I require my students to define and cite unit of analysis and then tell me what yours is. Okay. Qualitatively, you will describe your unit of analysis in terms of the phenomena, and quantitatively, you will describe it in your variable structure, meaning the operational, conceptual, or the measurement structure of your variables. But the unit of analysis has to be there. There's tons of YouTube videos on unit of analysis if you don't understand, but that is a term that you will have to grasp. Also in this section, you will need to address the research differences, like I talked about, population of interest, general population, target population, and sample, okay? And it's not sample population, it's sample, okay? The general population would be, if I were to give an example, let me give an example. General population would be all healthcare workers who currently work in primary care positions in the US. That would be your general population, the big, huge funnel of people that you're talking about. And then your target population would be healthcare workers from a large metropolitan healthcare provider in the upper Midwest. So you notice I went from US, which was the general population, down to the Midwest, which is my target population. But I'm talking about the same people, but I'm going from a huge geographic area to a little bit smaller. And then when I get to my sample, I go even smaller. So that example would be 10 to 12 randomly selected healthcare workers from a metropolitan area in, let's say, Chicago or something like that, because Chicago is Midwest, so we could go even smaller. And instead of being Midwest, we can just fine tune it more to Chicago. So you go from general population, which is huge, down to target population, which gets smaller, down to your sample, which gets smaller. Your sample directly comes out of your target population. The only difference between your target and your sample is that your sample has a number attached to it, where you say specifically how many people out of that target you chose or used for your study. Okay, so you can do some more research on there, but when you talk about this section, when you're talking about the problem statement section, you will have to identify what the general population is. And I think it also asks about the target population, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, remember that there is a page and paragraph limit on this section. So be succinct and concise. So now let's go on to this purpose statement. Okay, what's the difference in a purpose and a problem statement? Well, we know that our problem statement starts with "it is not known," but our purpose statement is going to have a very, very methodical way of being constructed, okay? And actually, your problem statement is embedded inside of your purpose statement, verbatim. You're going to take certain components of that problem statement and just pop it into that purpose statement. Again, the purpose statement, every time that it is talked about in your draft, will remain the same. It is another one of the few items in your dissertation that you can use copy and paste, and you should, because the purpose statement should never change. It should always be narrated the same, just as your problem statement, okay? And the purpose statement provides a reflection of the problem statement. I said again, the problem statement is in there, and it identifies how the study will be accomplished. So it's a declarative sentence again, and it is composed of the method plus the design plus the problem statement plus the sample plus the location. It is literally a formula. The purpose of this qualitative case study, okay, that is my method and that is my design, okay, is to explore how superintendents perceive the value of school choice within their school districts in Missouri, okay? So when I say that, I've started the sentence with the purpose of, that's my purpose statement, this qualitative case study, method plus design, is to explore how superintendents perceive the value of school choice in their districts. So my problem statement would be literally that. I just pulled that off the top of my head, but I popped my problem statement in there. And in Missouri. So that's my location. So my purpose statement is my method plus my design plus my problem statement plus my sample plus my location. It is an actual formula. And we'll go over this more when we're talking together. And I'll send out a document that actually shows how that is done. If you are actually writing the purpose statement section, you go a little bit beyond the actual statement. And after you narrate this clear, concise statement using the formula that I just talked about, you will make sure that it's constructed with no gaps, that it's very clear. It doesn't leave the reader with any questions. It follows the correct format. The components are aligned with the other sections. One way you know that is when your problem statement is embedded directly in there, okay? And that you narrate it the same in the entire draft, and that it defines what your phenomena or your variables are, okay? So some other things in this purpose statement section that I didn't want to forget, I took some notes here. Variables, relationships of value, variables, yeah. In this particular section, they're going to ask you about your variables. You're going to have to describe them, what they are. It will ask you about your phenomena, how you're going to explore it, and what does it mean. So you'll give a couple of sentences on your particular variable or phenomena, depending on what your method is. So again, take note, there is a maximum page and paragraph limit for this section, and it's not much. It may be a paragraph, I'm not sure. Okay, so now that we've talked about the problem statement and the purpose statement, the last part of this video snippet is on the research questions. How in the heck do I form my research questions? Well, you will have to, first of all, know your problem and purpose statement. You will also probably do well to look at the video clip that I will have on theoretical framework, because for qualitative people especially, you will need to know your theory in order to be able to correctly format these research questions. So even though I am not talking about theory in this video, I'm going to refer to it, and you will probably need to see the theory video if you're not unsure of what I'm talking about when I'm going over this. But you can't format research questions without knowing what your theory is and underpinning those research questions to connect both your problem and the theory. You have to narrate them with all of that in consideration, because you have to prove as a researcher that the theory or theories that you've chosen are interwoven into every part of your draft. So when you talk about it in your theory section, and when you narrate questions that are underpinned by the theory, you are proving that that theory has been taken into consideration. Because in researching and answering those questions, you will be able to analyze and collect data with that theory in mind. In addition to that, you need to know what your theory is, because that will form the outline for your lit review. And I don't want to go too much into that, but just to give you some nuances of that, I'll do a whole nother video on theory. However, so research questions. So research questions need to specifically address the problem statement. They can't be a stab in the dark. They need to directly address whatever your problem statement is. The rule of thumb is that you need a minimum of 2 research questions, regardless of what method you're using. You usually need a minimum of 2, okay? The research questions and hypotheses, if you're doing quantitative, you'll have hypotheses. They should be derived from and are directly aligned with your problem statement and your theory. I can't say that enough. Your problem statement and your theory have to be aligned in your research questions, okay? So if the study is qualitative, you need to state the research questions that the study will answer and describe the phenomena to be studied, okay, when you're writing this particular section. In addition, in a qualitative study, the research question should be addressed through the lens of one of the theory components. Okay, that's when I said about theory and research questions. So let me just give a quick overview. I'll go into more detail in my next snippet. However, if I have a theory and that theory is made up of A, B, C, then I should have a question referring to my problem statement through the lens of A, my problem statement through the lens of B, my problem statement through the lens of C. Okay? So that's how I would narrate my research questions. I would not just haphazardly come up with questions that I think are needful. No, your theory is going to guide your questions in consideration of the problem statement. They work together. Okay, so you will literally have research questions that look almost identical to your problem statement, but they will be tweaked because you will take into consideration components of your theory. But they will look extremely alike, as they should. So as I've talked about it, I said you have a problem statement, and then your purpose statement has your problem statement that's embedded in it. And then on top of that, your research questions are actually your problem statements with consideration of your theory. All of those items should look extremely similar. Your problem, your purpose, your research questions. And that's why, because they're all derived from one another, okay? So they should look extremely similar. Again, as I said about the problem and purpose statement, your research questions should never be changed. Every time you refer to your research questions, they should literally be copy and pasted as stated earlier in the draft. No adjustments from that. Okay, if the study is quantitative, the research questions will basically answer the problem statement. It may not be as direct as in qualitative when you're pulling those components of the theory for each one. However, in quantitative research, each of your variables will have to have a theory that's attached to it. So when you have those variables that are considered, you will look at that question through the lens of the theory that's attached to that particular variable. So it's a little bit different. However, theory is still considered when doing that, okay? For you quantitative people, when you are doing your research questions and the hypotheses that are attached to them, remember the null hypothesis goes first. The null goes first, then your hypothesis. So take note again that there is a page and paragraph limit on this particular section. And I think, again, it is literally a couple of sentences and your research questions. So happy writing until we meet again.